Okay, I think we're going to start the class. Thank you again for joining this evening, everybody. I am Chef Nin. I am an instructor at ICE in New York City. Where are you guys joining from? Let me know. Today, we're going to bake two recipes that are going to be gluten-free. I hope you guys are excited. We're going to convert chocolate chip cookies to a gluten-free chocolate chip cookie and a carrot muffin into a gluten-free carrot muffin, okay? So please feel free to let me know if you guys have any questions. And we're going to start now with the carrot muffins. So the ingredients, if you guys have the recipe, do read along. Or if you want to write down any notes, if you want to let me know any questions, let me know. So what we're going to do here is start with all the ingredients I have ready for you, okay? So we have some dry mixed ingredients here. We have buckwheat, sugar, baking soda, ginger, nutmeg, and cinnamon powder mixed together in a bowl here. And so when you're baking muffin, this is a very easy recipe to make muffin. What you want to do is mix all the dry ingredients together. And then for the wet ingredients, today we're going to grate fresh carrot. I'm going to start by peeling this carrot. And we're going to grate this on the cheese grater. You guys want to grate it on, not on the biggest part, but on the maybe a medium grade. If it's too big, it could be too wet, or it might be still too crunchy for you. So I'm actually going to choose a medium size. You're going to grate carrots for about 3/4 of a cup. So this is going to also add some moisture and a sweetness to the recipe. I like to grate my own carrot if I have time. So this recipe came up as, it started with a little bit of an accident. So in a class, we have a class called conversion class, and we asked all the students to convert the recipe from a regular flour to a gluten-free flour. And that's really, really fun for them. So a student asked to convert this muffin recipe into a gluten-free because she was gluten-free. So now, accidentally found out this turned out to be a very, very delicious muffin. And I actually enjoyed it much more than a regular flour. So I would like to share that with you today. So for our wet ingredients, I'm going to use this bowl and mix the rest of the ingredients here together. We have the carrot, about 3/4 of a cup. You're going to be 2 eggs in this bowl. Raisins, chopped walnut. And if you use fresh pineapple, just make sure that you squeeze all the water out. And also if it's a can, you want to make sure you squeeze out extra water from the can because it will add too much moisture to your muffin. It won't bake correctly if it's too wet, okay? So I do squeeze out as much water as possible, the pineapple juice. And then I have melted 1 stick of butter here. And now you're going to get your spatula or a whisk. Thank you, Jessica. Mix it together. So I want to take your time and make sure everything mixed really well. So once we bake this gluten-free carrot muffin, I'm going to show you the difference between a regular and a gluten-free version. It's not much of a difference in terms of texture, but the color will be different. This is going to be the case when you make gluten-free pastry. Also, so now you have a dry ingredient and a wet ingredient together, and I'm going to mix them.
Chef, we have a few questions.
Yes.
If someone doesn't have buckwheat flour,
Yeah.
are there other types of flours that they could use in this recipe?
Yeah, so if you don't have the buckwheat flour, I have used oat flour before. A combination of rice flour and tapioca flour can and do really well in this recipe as well. This recipe is very forgiving in terms of converting from non-gluten-free to gluten-free. What I find so much harder is to go from gluten-free and vegan. That's when the real struggle begins, okay? When you were trying to replace one thing, it is easier than to replace flour and egg. So I feel like whatever gluten-free flour that you can find in the market will work really well with this recipe, Ashley. I just personally choose the buckwheat flour because I like the color and the nuttiness that it gives. You will see in the end result after we're done baking this, it's going to, it looks like adult muffins. So it would look like you feel healthy already just looking at it. So now you see that I mix the muffin, the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients together. Now what we're gonna do is I'm going to get my muffin tin.
And we actually have a few more questions.
Yes.
How finely should the pineapple be chopped?
So if you get the canned pineapple, it is the crushed canned pineapple. It's just say crushed. If you're using a fresh pineapple, you want to chop it pretty much as small as you can. Anything that is a big chunk, it might not give the same effect as a minced up pineapple. It should be well incorporated. So it's small enough that it should be able to spread out all over your muffin. Anything too chunky might not work.
Great. And what about if you wanted to substitute coconut oil for butter? Would that work?
Yeah, so coconut oil is actually and butter. So this is going into the vegan world, okay? And I really like this. So when you think about coconut oil, coconut butter, to substitute with butter is actually not one-to-one. You have to think about butter as part oil, part fat, part milk solid. So when you're going to substitute from coconut oil to butter, you have to add extra moisture to it. Since you're taking away butter, meaning you're taking away milk and fat. When you're adding coconut oil, you have to add a little bit more moisture to substitute for that milk solid you're losing from taking the butter out of your solution. So it will work if after you mix your muffin batter already with your coconut oil, if you find it a little bit too stiff, you will splash a little bit of that plant-based milk that you have and makes it the consistency of a muffin again.
And I see that you're using the muffin liners.
Yeah.
What if someone doesn't have those? Could you still bake these?
You can go ahead and just make it straight up. I like to use a muffin liner so I can transport it, pack it to work, pack it in my my kid's lunchbox. So it's easier to transport. So I can just bake it right into the pan.
And one last question. When you are baking, do you prefer to use weight measurements instead of volume? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the professional kitchen, we would like to very much try to use the metric system. When I'm working with a client that is more amateur cooks that might not have scales, I like to use a volume so they can use their cups and spoons to measure the muffins. In a professional setting, very much encourage you to use the scale. So in grams would be the best in terms of precise. How to get it very precise, okay? And it's easier to scale up or scale down. It's easier to convert as well. if you get everything in grams. It's not always easy to find. It's not always common to have scale in your home. So I've decided to use a volume recipe for today.
And a few other questions about the using alternative flours.
Yeah.
So if you were using can you blend different types of gluten-free flours together?
Yes. So this is another thing that you can do with your gluten-free baking. As once you have tried some of the gluten-free flour options that you like, you can start mixing them. Each of the different gluten-free flour, they act differently and they do taste and color differently. So today I'm specifically choosing buckwheat because the color that I like and also the nuttiness flavor that would pair well with all the spices and the carrot cake. So if one day I'm making just vanilla cupcake, I might choose oat flour or a blend of rice flour and tapioca just to give it that white flour and that doesn't really interfere with my subtle vanilla flavor. So one can mix. So my favorite gluten-free flour mix, I use rice flour, brown rice flour, tapioca flour, and sometimes oat flour. These four mix really well together. One gives structure, one gives more of the starchiness, and one gives of that that lightness. So so you can mix them. So we're gonna actually bake this muffin for about 25 minutes. If your oven's at home, about 300 to 325 degrees at a kitchen in a oven in our kitchen today, about 350. Thank you, Jessica.
And one other question about experimenting with different flours.
Yeah.
So how would you figure out, what ratio to use the different flours? Or just like if you're playing around and let's say you want to try using rice flour in this recipe, would you start with like a 1-to-1 ratio, or would you, how could someone figure out the best way to start experimenting?
Yeah, this is when we have a lot of fun in school. So and in a plant-based program, we have a conversion class when we ask students to convert recipe to another using different flour, different eggs, different fat. And so what I ask usually the student to do is to substitute from 1-to-1. So you would replace totally all-purpose flour to a buckwheat flour, like today, for example. And if you learn that the buckwheat flour actually didn't give you the result you're looking for, you can start adding other flour. So maybe if you wanted more glutinous or more subtle color, you might want to mix buckwheat flour with oat flour or buckwheat flour with white rice flour just to mellow it down or to give it more of a chewy texture for your muffin. So you will start by 1-to-1 actually, and then you can starting to scale down from there. That's what I recommend. So start from 1-to-1 first.
And one more question before you move on to the next recipe. What is the role of the pineapple in this recipe? And could you use other like citrus fruits in it?
Yeah, so for pineapple, it's only just giving that natural sweetness. And if you don't, you're not all about pineapple, you can substitute with banana or dry fruits. So it would give it more texture. Actually the other day I used banana in the recipe and it came out really well. So you can actually turn this into a banana muffin, if you know what I mean. So just substituting, take out the carrot, take out the pineapple and mash or overwrite banana in there and you can get yourself a gluten-free banana muffin. You can also add some of citrus or add a little bit of jam or dry fruits. Work really well with this recipe as well. So the next recipe we're doing, everybody, is chocolate chip cookies. And this one is more fun because we're gonna get to use the KitchenAid, okay? So first thing I'm gonna do is push this down a tiny bit. And I'm going to sift this flour. So in here we have oat flour, baking powder, and some salt. So I like to sift this flour first just to make sure that you don't have extra clumpiness in that flour. Buckwheat flour, you don't really usually have a lot of problems. Oat flour sometimes can clump up. So I suggest if your gluten-free flour starts to clump up, you can sift it to make it nice and light. Thank you, Jess. So after your flour is sifted, you have you can do this by hand, by the way. You don't have to use it in the KitchenAid, but you're going to use room temperature butter. In here we have white flour and white sugar and brown sugar. You're going to mix them together. You're gonna cream up butter and sugar together until it's light and fluffy. So when we cream the sugar and the butter first, for our chocolate chip cookie today, it's gonna help with the spread. So when we bake our chocolate chip cookie, it would be nice and big and spready. Personally, I like that look when of a chocolate chip cookie. I like it nice and flat and a little bit chewy in the middle. Let me know if you how you like your chocolate chip cookies. So we're going to cream the butter and the sugar. So in here, butter, brown sugar, and white sugar. Separately, I have the flour and all the dry ingredient that I sifted together. And we're going to fold in chocolate chips at the end. As soon as your butter is fluffy, you're going to add your egg and vanilla. You're gonna let that mix in for about a minute. So again, this recipe came up as by accident. So in class, we usually students will come up with a lot of options to convert cookies. So some would use buckwheat flour. Actually, we have tried this recipe with buckwheat flour and it came out really, really nice. It's like adult chocolate chip cookie. It looks a little bit dark and it gives it you that kind of smoky and nutty flavor. I really like it. But I find that oat flour works best with this recipe since it doesn't change a lot of the color or the texture of the cookie. You have the same effect as you would get as a regular all-purpose flour with this one. So after you mix the eggs and the sugar, vanilla, and butter all together so it looks nice, well incorporated. Now you're going to fold in some flour.
Does the oat flour impact the texture of this cookie as opposed to using regular all-purpose flour?
Almond flour or all-purpose flour?
Does using the oat flour that you're using change the texture?
Yeah.
Like in comparison to just using regular all-purpose?
Yeah, so it doesn't change as much, and that's why I picked this oat flour for this recipe because I wanted as close texture as possible to completely replace flour. So in terms of crunchiness and the chewiness, you still get that same effect actually. So I find that's very, very nice. So if you oat flour is a little bit more lighter. It's a little bit lighter than all-purpose flour. It doesn't have any gluten. It's just straight up starch, right? So but it after it's cooked, it have that structure and that chewiness that you would get after you bake a chewy cookies. So it's as close as possible. So doesn't change as much.
Great. And then if you were going to try using other alternative flours in this recipe, like almond flour,
Yes.
or like what other types of flours would you recommend for this recipe?
Yeah, so this one will also work with again, so we have tried it with the buckwheat flour before. It works really, really well. It will give you a little bit of an extra nuttiness and a color and a little bit smokiness. It's like adult chocolate chip. I love it. And you can use a gluten-free flour mix that you find over the counter. You know, Bob Bread's Mill, King Arthur, I think, made pre-mixed flour. And those, when you look behind the bag, the ingredients are basically rice flour, brown rice flour, tapioca flour, which with that combination gives that perfect mix because rice flour is a starch, brown rice flour gives you that kind of fibrous texture, and the tapioca helps bind everything together. So it when you mix all those together, it kind of mimicking that all-purpose flour that you would get. So any over-the-counter gluten-free flour you can use. Personally, I would choose oat flour since I find that as close to result as possible.
Okay, and then one question about this recipe. Is it possible to over mix the butter and the sugar together?
Yeah, if you mix the flour, the butter and the sugar too much, it might be very fluffy and you get a very, very crunchy. It's not a bad thing. You're supposed to cream it until it's fluffy. If you whip it way too much, it might become too flat after it bakes, since it doesn't it has a lot of air in your cookie. After you bake it, it won't be able to kind of it kind of bursts all the bubbles after you bake the cookie. So it's not going to be a huge downside. Not like you over whip flour, which is not a problem today since nothing has gluten in it. So for gluten-free cookies, you can whip however you want. It's not going to be an over mixing anything since there's no gluten in here. So right in the mixing bowl, I have oat flour and the baking powder and salt. Just barely mix with the fat and the sugar right now.
And then Chef, one question.
Yeah.
We talked about over mixing the butter and the sugar. What happens if you undermix the butter and the sugar?
So if you undermix it, meaning so we creaming the butter and the sugar to make sure to be able to for our cookies to spread. So if you just mix everything in one bowl, your cookie might not spread. You just have a domey cookie. It could be a look if you're going for that. So don't whip your fat too much. If you want your cookie to come out domey and round. So this recipe can be done without whipping the butter at all. You just get a different look as an outcome. So now what I'm doing is just taking the batter out of the paddle here. I'm going to lightly fold in our chocolate chip. So I know I asked for 1 cup of chocolate chip. I might have spilled a little bit more in there. I love the chocolate chip. And you can put a good amount. Okay, I like it oozy and kind of like melts after you cut your after you break your cookies. It should be very melty. So just barely mix everything together. Your batter is going to look like this. So in this form, you can pack it up and bake it tomorrow or keep it in the freezer, keep it in your fridge, ready to bake at any day that you want. We're gonna bake it right now. So I'm gonna use this tray. So this chocolate chip cookie will spread a ton. So I'm gonna show you the result in a little bit. When you want to, when you're scooping this cookie recipe, you're going to give it a good amount of space, okay? So I'm gonna use this whole scoop here. And scoop it down. So I like to give it lots of personal space. So allow for spreading to happen and so they won't touch each other. So after you scoop them, this should give you about 6 to 8 baked cookies, okay? After that, I do a little trick here to make sure that my cookie is flat. I press it down before I bake it. If you don't press down at all, it'll be a little bit domey or it could be a little bit under in the middle. It could be a very nice and chewy cookie. I personally like it to be flat and a little bit of a crunch and crispy outside. So this cookie is going to now getting baked 350 for about 10 minutes. So now we're going to wait for those to bake. So let me,
While those bake, can we ask a few questions?
yes.
So what size cookie scoop were you using to make the dough, or
So you
what
can
size should the dough be on the pan for the cookie?
Yeah, so you can use any scoop, but that one was about 1.5 to 2 ounces. Will give you cookie this big. Okay, so I have a cookie that is this big. So that was about 2 ounces scoop. If you use a one ounce, it will be a more traditional, maybe a little bit half the size of this. So this one came out, this is a gluten-free cookies compared to a non-gluten-free. Okay, so the color is a little bit really close together. And also the gluten-free one and the regular one taste, in my opinion, really, really similar. So you have very nice and chewy. And also same with this one. Now for your carrot cake. For your carrot cake muffin, you'll see that the color is totally different. But the texture and the rise is pretty much the same. So this use the same scoop, same everything, just different flour, okay? So for our gluten-free, for a gluten-free muffin, which you can tell is darker since it has that buckwheat flour. It's very nice and moist, so I'm just gonna break it in half. So you can, the texture is really nice and very moist. And the flavor that it gives is a little bit nuttiness. And the sweetness is the same. So this is our regular muffin with regular flour. The only difference is the color. So if you were to use the oat flour, it would just look white without kind of minus that nuttiness of the flavor that you have from the buckwheat flour. Personally, I like the gluten-free one better. I find that it you can taste more of the spices that you put in this muffin. Then since the all-purpose flour can mask a little bit of that spice, so you end up putting more. When you use gluten-free flour, the one like buckwheat, you can taste more of the spices. Really good.
Okay, amazing. Thanks, Chef Nin. A few questions about the chocolate chip cookie recipe. When should you add the chocolate chips in? After you've scooped the dough or when it's still in the bowl and mixing?
So you're gonna add your chocolate chip or white chocolate chip or butterscotch chips or peanut butter chip that you have at the end. So you're not going to mix in there with the paddle or in the beginning. You're going to fold in right at the end before you're going to scoop.
Okay, and then could you add nuts or any other mix-ins that you wanted to?
Yes, exactly. So you can add any other mix-in. It's going to come at the end. So after you mix your butter, sugar, you add your flour, And then you're gonna add your mix in at the end, so you don't break it or mix it in too much. So your chocolate can still stay nice and whole. So I like to add nuts, white chocolate chip, milk chocolate chip.
Okay, and then we have a few questions about different types of flours.
Yeah.
So one question is, how is brown rice flour different from white rice flour?
Yeah, so the brown rice flour, different with the color already. It has that outer, more fibrous than the white rice flour, since it have extra fiber that you get from it, and it's a little bit more glutinous than a white rice flour. The white rice flour would be closer in terms of color, but the brown rice flour would be closer to more in terms of give you more structure. So usually when you see in the back of your pre-mixed gluten-free flour, you see that it mixes them together, because one gives one thing and the other gives the other purpose. So when I do a mix, I'll mix them both together. So it gets both ways. I get the fibers and I get the flavor and the texture.
Okay. And is tapioca starch the same thing as tapioca flour?
Tapioca flour and tapioca starch are they're not quite the same. Tapioca starch are more of a binding agent. So it is a starch. So you might want to use that as a binding. The tapioca flour is actually the more main of the one that you might want to use if you want to bake with a bulk majority of tapioca flour. Tapioca starch helps binds together other gluten-free flour. So it's part of the mix, but it's not quite the whole picture.
And if someone wanted to use almond flour in either of these recipes, would you suggest they use a 1-to-1 ratio to swap that in instead of the buckwheat or the oat flour?
Yeah, totally. So almond flour can be sub 100% with both of these recipes. Yes. It would give you that extra nutty flavor since it's nuts. It less starch, more protein, more beneficial for you, more texture in terms of the crunch. So yes, you can stop for it.
When you're substituting different types of flours, do you know which types of flours retain more liquid than others?
Yes, so this is going to take some experimenting. So when we're doing experimenting in class, we learn from mistakes. So so that's why we're starting substitution from the recipe that we know works. So as long as you know that your muffin recipe works really well, then you're going to use the flour that you want to substitute 100%. And then you'll learn after you mix that batter, it seems dry or it seems wet, then you know that flour takes more or takes less. So in general, gluten-free flour takes a little bit, about some of them less, some of them more. So it depends on which one. What they need extra is sometimes they need a little bit longer time to bake, since it is sometimes less milk. So gluten-free baked goods usually take longer to bake. Some might require different, more or less moisture. And usually all of them require you to bake in a smaller size. So you would most likely not seeing any big gluten-free loaf because they don't have a lot of structure to rise the whole bread. So you'll see usually gluten-free goods in a smaller vessel like these. It doesn't have gluten to raise the whole thing, and that's why. It'll be really dense if you bake it in a big container.
Is oat flour made by blending oats or like grinding oats?
Yes, you can blend oats at home. It would not give you the oat flour that you get from Bob's Red Mill. So that is professional mill and it's really extra fine. And I recommend you you use the one that you buy at the store if you want to do it professionally or make it making a bigger batch for consistency. You can make your oat flour at home. It will be a little bit more grainy. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not consistent.
And then another question about making cookies. Does refrigerating the dough have any impact on the flavor or texture or anything? And if you're using an alternative flour, would refrigerating the dough have the same or any effect?
Yeah, so they will affect a little bit, but in terms of the chocolate chip cookie, this one, not really. The muffin, I recommend bake right away since it's a lot of moisture that the flour can take in and it will become too dry. So for the cookie dough, you can save, but the muffin usually is something that you make and bake right away that day. You don't really keep the batter since there's a lot of moisture that you work with in the egg. So it can turn, doesn't matter gluten-free or not. Usually muffin is like a one bowl project and you just bake it that day. Cookie dough, usually you can keep. Doesn't matter gluten-free or not.
And I know we were focusing on alternative flours, but we have a lot of questions about like alternative sweeteners.
Yes.
So what would you recommend just for either of these recipes or like some things in general that people can try at home?
Yeah, so I really like to use maple sugar, and you can find it at Whole Foods. It is much extra expensive. It is worth it though, it's really delicious. To substitute sugar with maple sugar is 1-to-1. If you want to use maple syrup, you would have to use a little bit less since it's also adding extra moisture to your recipe. You can use agave. If you use agave, you use much less. Agave is very sweet. Honey, you'll actually use less honey as well since honey is very wet and also very sweet. What else can you use? Coconut sugar is really good. Coconut sugar, you can substitute 1-to-1 with the sugar. So coconut sugar and maple sugar are two most reliable in terms of the white sugar.
Okay, and then one last question about flours.
One last question.
I know a lot of questions. Have you ever used cassava flour in baking?
Cassava flour, yes, cassava flour also a very good substitute. I have used it to make pasta dough. It's really, really good. It has that kind of chewy, the right amount of chewiness. It will taste like cassava though, so it tastes that starchiness, like you know when you eat potato or cassava, you can taste that. So might not have the best aftertaste, but the texture is really great. Ooh. So here's our gluten-free muffin coming out. Looking amazing, okay. So yes, if I have to choose, I'll do the gluten-free version every day. It's extra good. So this is freshly came out. Yes, freshly out. Ooh, it's still hot. So you can see, I'll go up here. ASMR moment, everybody. Here I come. There you go. What? Is it gluten-free? Yes, it is. Here, Corey can try some. Yes.
All right. I think that's all the questions and everything we have for today. Just a reminder, we're the Institute of Culinary Education. We have campuses in New York City and Los Angeles, and we have a few different online programs. So if you're not located in either of those states, you know, there's still some, you know, culinary education that's available to you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chef Nin, for demoing today.
Thank you, Jess. Jessica.
All right, and we'll be sending a link to everyone who registered a video for the class and the recipes so you can bake these at home.
Thank you for coming.